Welcome to Laugh and Learn with Chief Owl Katie L. Eades. That's me. If this is your first time here at Owl Podcast, I encourage you to check out all the amazing stories of women leaders around the world that we share here at Owl. Usually on Fridays, I'm hosting a podcast with Marissa Senzaki, Live, Laugh, Shut the F Up, and Listen to Your Body mostly, which is what I'm going to talk about here today at HeartMath. And I also co host a podcast coming out shortly called F Around and Find Out. Playbooks are for players. Tune in and learn how to become your own hero and write your own story. Your playbook is you and a pen. But enough about Owl. Let's talk today about the HeartMath experience. I am just coming out of the 3 days of the 2 teach backs and a training. And if you are like me and don't know what a teach back is, that is where you find out at 41 that the ADHD diagnosis is real. It's where you go for 6 hours. I don't know how I did high school, and sit for 30 minutes and listen to somebody do a presentation on knowledge that you have, but you're learning something new because they present it differently and get inspired. So it's exciting, but it requires me to sit still. And what I immediately noticed is as my fatigue really got worse, people in the boxes weren't moving, but I was. And they talk about this looking very different in girls. And for me, my self-regulation, I am staying very present. I'm very connected to my breath. I was wearing the device a lot. The device measures your heart rate variability, which is what we look at for coherence versus incoherence. I wanted to make sure I was feeding the energetic field with good energy from my classmates. But I also really struggle at sitting still, and I have a standing desk, but I was worried that if I stood, that I would just still be moving as much and it might be more distracting. I'm not really sure if it was or not. I didn't actually ask anybody, and nobody gave me feedback as an audience participant. So if you're tuning in and you were in that class, drop a comment. I would love to, number one, have a comment, and number two, love to hear if that was something that you noticed. And I appreciate you allowing me to just move around a lot. The HeartMath experience is something that I have sent to over 500 people since I entered the coaching space in 2020. And I didn't realize until I ordered and opened a Joe Dispenza book this year that it was a tool that's the tool he's using. If you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, You Are the Placebo, Becoming Supernatural. He was paralyzed and walked again and he is a doctor, a medical one. And I think the work he's doing in the healing space is phenomenal. And I didn't realize he was using the same tools that I was using. And when I had an Akashic record reading with Leilani Lucero, who is a much better plug if you're interested in learning more about the quantum field of information, that field that we're feeding, it's the Akashic ocean of information. When we talk in HeartMath about accessing the collective intelligence in the room, I found it fascinating that the more people that there are there, the less intelligence is in the room. Made perfect sense. When we talk about accessing that, we're accessing the Akashic realm, the ocean of Akashic. And Leilani Lucero is here to be a clairvoyant. She's here to use her clarity and intuition and her psychic abilities to connect with those that have transitioned over, those that are in this realm, so to speak, vibration, I suppose is a word to use. I'll have her link dropped here if you want to book a discounted reading with my link. You can have that experience. And when she told me other lives, I was a doctor, and it made perfect sense to me why I got the degree this time in history, so that I could make sure that we understand that people repeat themselves, not history. And it made sense to me why I also came across the HeartMath tool and experience. And the reason I did the certification is because out of all the tools I've experimented with, that your cutting edge people, your thought leaders, Those people that think they're on the pulse of what we should be doing are recommending. HeartMath was overwhelmingly, whether you are in the military, you are PTSD ex-military, you have ADHD, you are a tech engineer, regardless of your background, a lot of manufacturing, you were finding this tool to be your favorite. It kept coming up over and over again. That and human design, which is why also BG5, I'll have another episode where I'll talk about that once I wrap up my first and second semester. And because of the feedback of my clients and the ones I'm attracting, I want to develop more of the team coherence. I coach individuals, but beyond work teams, we're also in a spouse team. We're in a parent-child team. Anytime we have a quantum field, 1 + 1 is 3 energetically. There's 2 people feeding the energetic field that we know we can measure 4 feet around us. And the only reason we can't measure it further is because the scientific technology is not there. And you have the opportunity to either experiment or just sit and wait for the technology to get there, and then you can experiment. So I encourage you to experiment. But we've all done this. We've thought about someone and they message us. We thought about someone and we run into them in the store. We are synchronizing. We are magnetic beings. And that is not disputed in science. Whether or not it's taught, whether or not you're aware of it, that's why all the white papers and the ridiculous amount of research that HeartMath continues to invest in is useful for those of you that love data. So knowing that you're a magnetic being, the stronger your magnet, the stronger your attraction. And when we can increase self-awareness about how we're meant to breathe, what happens in our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system when we're breathing in different places in our body, what happens when we focus on our heart when we breathe. So many opportunities to learn. As a teacher, that's why we laugh and learn here. And I'm glad I didn't teach science because I would not have enjoyed that type of science. This is the fun stuff. This wasn't A squared plus B squared. Sacred geometry and numerology. Also, Pythagoras's work, by the way. He didn't just have the A squared plus B squared. Pythagoras and mathematicians, sacred geometry, they had a much deeper understanding of knowledge than we have today. And we're kind of reaching that crux where we're running into science is not cutting edge enough. You got to go back to the people that you once were and take a look at what they were saying. Waiting for science to trickle in. We know that that's systems that have to move. So I encourage you to check out their resources and attend one of the free classes I'll be offering. And you'll get a chance on the 8/8 to meet Leilani Lucero, and really understand how your energy system works. Because we're here to manipulate energy. That's what we've been doing in mankind. And we've been looking at every place we can manipulate energy outside of ourselves. What the science also shares for us is that we give off an electromagnetic field that's only about an inch off of our head. We know the heart is the processing center. We know the heart has its own separate nervous system. It's got its own separate brain, and it's sending all of the signals up. The heart receives the information before the mind. And we can use the neuroscience to support that, even though neuroscience is typically still hanging out in the mind as if somehow we're not one also large system. And the main system is that nervous one. Remember, that keeps getting nervous. And understanding that 20% of your body's energy is going just to maintain the brain is part of why the brain prefers automation. And your limbic system, excuse me while I grab my leadership book here from Harvard, back to your Harvard 10 must reads. We know that the limbic system is the part that is required to shift in order for transformational change. I know this from owning a gym. I know this from my own weight loss. I know this from still finding myself falling back into old habits decades later because there was not true change at the nervous system level. There's something else there that still needs to be processed. I love the cut through technique that we offer at HeartMath to transform the emotional memories and mindsets. And that is not something you do overnight. But just like when I stepped into a CrossFit gym over 200 pounds and then I stepped out and after I owned one, obviously not at 200 pounds, it actually didn't take nearly as long to get there as you would think. It took about a year. And some of these very traumatic events, I like to bring belly breathing in so we can activate serotonin, and we can belly breathe anytime you want during the day. When you're doing everyday tasks, we want those calming hormones to be something that you can easily access. And for those traumatic memories, we've got to create a new one. And the best way to create a new one is visualization. It's 95% of the brain doesn't really know the difference. And it's a really great way for you to experiment, because as you do the visualizations, as you connect with your heart, focusing on breathing through the heart, I like to also activate the belly while I'm doing that. So the mind focuses on the heart, the body breathes through the belly. When you do that, and if you're doing it while you're listening, you will notice it's really hard to be mad. I love that the nervous system is pretty much like a train track where they're not going to really overlap. More importantly, the precursor hormone for cortisol is the same precursor hormone for DHEA, which is the renewing hormone. And so the stimulus doesn't have to change, it's the response. And there is a pause between stimulus and response. Although I read this book on free will that was a New York Times bestseller that said we don't really have it. The heart's made its mind up 10 minutes before. Research at HeartMath has this cool study where it looks like the heart is predicting answers and they are correct, and the heart is correct. And the heart is sending that signal up, and the amygdala is looking for what is familiar. This is why you can walk in a doorway and you don't have to figure out how a door works every time, but you will push when you should pull because you didn't read it, or maybe you read it while you went to pull. Maybe you read it and you still did the opposite because you have a similarity bias, you have an experience bias, you have an expedience bias, you have a distance bias. I imagine this isn't a door you enter every day, and if it is, I have questions. Go see an Alzheimer's doctor, perhaps. I digress. Your heart's really powerful if you haven't taken that away yet, or been entertained enough to say, I need to take a class with Katie. Katie's Corporate Classroom will be launching on portable professional development, so via podcast. And you'll have the opportunity to also attend live classes. And right now, until I move, I'm offering them for free because I need something to do in between this move. My heart feels very called to spark some of this for as many people as possible. I will have some evergreen free content for you. And this is your invitation to invite some people that you know, have your team member listen, or teammate, as I was trying to say, I think there, listen to it as well. In leadership, we know that the limbic system is ultimately where emotional memories are stored. It's what's running the show in the background. The amygdala is looking for the familiar. It's not looking for safety. I'd like to make that clear. That's why Stockholm Syndrome is a thing. That's why women stay in relationships. It's looking for the familiar. When I understood that, it made sense why my brain looked for the familiar in relationships after my divorce. When we heal the nervous system, we create new memories. We have a new familiar. And there is more space between, love to use little Dave Matthews here. There is more space between the stimulus and the response when you start to develop more awareness, and being in your body allows that awareness to show up. That is why we tell people to live, laugh, and shut the F up and listen, because your body has answers. Not listen to the thought leaders, not listen to the latest society's piece of advice on how to advance. Although if you were to listen to one, back to my HBR book, emotional intelligence is quite the buzzword. Everyone has an opinion on how to get it. Clearly, they don't have the answer, or we wouldn't see what we see in companies. To enhance emotional intelligence, coming straight from the Orange HBR's 10 Must Reads on Leadership book, to enhance emotional intelligence, organizations must refocus their training to include the limbic system. They must help people break old behavioral habits and establish new ones. That not only takes much more time than conventional training programs, it also requires an individualized approach. What truly sets me apart is the ability for me to provide an individualized approach in a room full of 30 people, proven because I was a high school teacher, 35 really, if I'm measuring that, and 180 on the roster. Being able to provide individual training is what I'm able to offer with the human design tool. BG5 is the corporate version. Told you I'd mention that in the next podcast on the foundational level. We need 3 pieces of information to know how the electromagnetic field impacted you the moment you were born. Your birth date, time, location. Obviously, the year is part of that birth date. My dad will argue he just needs the numbers and he can do your numerology. I like the human design system so I can see the way your energy is designed to flow. And you get your self-regulation. You have to take ownership over the heart brain. Congrats. The heart and the brain have been fighting this whole time, and the heart gets to win. Listen to your heart. It's definitely calling for you. Here's what HBR goes on to say. Imagine an executive who is thought to be low on empathy by her colleagues. Part of that deficit shows itself as an inability to listen. She interrupts people, doesn't pay close attention to what they're saying. To fix the problem, the executive needs to be motivated to change. I like to throw in inspired to change because I think a lot of people are motivated for different results. But there's inspiration that has to show up. For me, the CrossFit gym was an inspiration of a community that I felt accepted in, I felt seen, until I didn't. And that's why the motivation to go back to a CrossFit gym and lift weights the way I lifted has not been there. I imagine there's probably some healing in there too. I digress back to HPR's book. They need to be motivated to change. She needs to practice and have feedback from others in the company. And this is what I tell my clients in coaching. More practice, less theory. First 6 weeks, I'm going to bring some theory in every time we meet. The practice is going to be that week that we're not in, that the 6 days in between the next meeting. And the feedback is we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to land on what you're going to ask people to proactively give you feedback on. And it does not happen overnight, but people see change pretty quickly, particularly when you tell them what to look for. It's like buying a new car. My favorite part about buying a new car is that you not only do you see it everywhere, but your limbic system stops looking for the old car. The amygdala stops scanning for the familiar, remember? So it stops looking for the old car because it's no longer familiar. When you miss an old car, which I've only ever had one client say, and this made sense for that client, she had a deep-seated trauma. And so she misses the old. She was 11 when she lost her mom. Most people want to see the new, but we have to have a memory of it. And in this case, you bought a car. And so the brain has a very tangible thing. Creating a visualization also creates part of that as well. I love the 1990, 94, I don't remember years, 90s Olympics. There's 3 Olympic skaters that are pretty much locked in. First place is pretty much locked in. Second place, third place, women's figure skating. They interviewed them right before they had their last skate. First place said, I just don't want to make any mistakes. Second place said, this is my last Olympics. I'd like to leave my best performance out there. Skate my best skate. Third place said, I didn't expect to be here. And it's true, she wasn't favored. And I'm going to go for this big whatever that she'd been working on. And how the story turns out is exactly what is familiar. When we have a fear of messing up, we mess up. She didn't just miss one. She didn't just miss two. She missed like 3 or 4. And her score dropped enough. And second place, sure enough, had the best skate of her life and had enough to exceed first place. Third place didn't stay where she was. I can't remember if she made the jump. That's how people remember third place usually. The moral of the story is you've got to give your brain something to think about, and it needs to feel it because your energy is a magnet. And so you can think about how nice it'll be. But if you aren't actually living in that moment and putting that energy there, then what you're feeding the field is still a lower vibration. It's not incoherence. You're feeding feeding the field is what we say when we talk about the energetic field around you that we can measure. We can actually measure the quality of that, the frequency. And it also means that you're not magnetizing. Remember, you're a magnet. Super excited to dive more into this. I could talk to you all day. I said I would keep it at 20 minutes in my head. We're at 21:25. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are interested in working with me one-on-one for your company, you can reach out at katie@owlprofessionalcoaching.com and wait 2 to 10 business days to get a hold of me. Or you can find that website, owlprofessionalcoaching.com. Probably do a little sleuthing and find my phone number if you look a little hard. And you can text me directly and let me know who you are and how we need to get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, have a hoot and do something fun.